I'm delighted to be joined by Ed Balls and Douglas Carswell. Ed, we've seen a slump in Jeremy Corbyn's popularity ratings. Does that change anything, or do you think he will still be Labour leader in 2020, which is, at the moment, the likely date for the general election?
Well, you can see a slow change happening and his own supporters reappraising the situation.
Do you want him to go?
I'm afraid that well, look, I've been in your programme many times and said what I think about Jeremy Corbyn, but there was a leadership election last year. The problem is, if you look at that poll, still less than 30% of Labour members think that winning the general election is an important priority. And until we get back to the point where members and voters are aligned on policy and think winning matters, I'm afraid at the moment it doesn't really feel as though the change is happening fast enough.
I mean, quite striking, Douglas, that when you look at the detail of the poll, when Labour members are asked to name 4 people they think could lead, actually Ed's wife comes out top. Now, I can't ask Ed about Yvette's...
Should definitely get my vote. Ed got my vote on Strictly, and Yvette would definitely get my vote, but it's not up to me.
Now, let's nail you down on this issue of the knighthood.
Yeah.
Did you try and block Nigel's knighthood?
I was asked to lobby after a decision had been made. Even if the decision hadn't been made...
Oh, you mean by the Honours Committee? They'd already made up their minds
They
not
make their
to give
decision in November, apparently. I was asked to lobby in December. I was being asked to close the stable door after the horse had bolted.
And did you try and close that stable door?
I think it'd be churlish for Nigel not to get an honour that recognises his contribution.
Right.
And
What should that be?
I've lobbied for Ukip getting its share of peerages and honours, and I've been quite robust in doing that. But fundamentally, if a decision is made in November and you ask me to intervene in December, I'm afraid even with my powers...
But just to be clear, this charge from Aaron Banks that you tried to block it, you're saying that's rubbish?
I have no power to block anyone's time.
But you didn't want to block it, is what you're saying? Are you saying you didn't want...
Yeah. Absolutely.
I've got to say, it seems to me Douglas has behaved completely honourably in this matter. On the other hand, today, to have Paul Nuttall riding to your defence, I mean, it's a bit of a blow, isn't it, really? I mean, possibly the least credible politician in Britain at the moment,
You like Paul Nuttall?
I do. I think Paul is great. I'm 100% behind him. Let's not... your party leader's got a few issues. My party in Parliament is 100% behind our party leader in a way that perhaps your party isn't yet. So,
and do you whip yourself?
I do, but we occasionally have a backbench rebellion, but I crush it brutally and savagely.
Now, look, there's a lot more to talk about with both of you. I'm going to come back to you. Just going to chew over some of that with my 2 guests. Ed, we talked a bit about the leadership, and you've just listened to Becky Long-Bailey. You are now an immensely popular person, having not been quite so popular when you were an MP. Why didn't you get back into politics? Why don't you stand in Manchester Gorton?
Because I'm working on doing a new chapter about Strictly for my paperback.
So I'm going back to Harvard to do a couple of lectures. So you're ruling yourself out of that? You're not going to put yourself forward?
I think if I was trying to stand in Manchester Gorton, I might not have spent December being a Zoolander male model or November doing the Char-Chars and Mad Scientists. Maybe that would have not been the smartest thing.
Just be absolutely clear, is this just an explicit... You're definitely not going to put yourself forward.
I'm not standing in a by-election.
Right.
I'm never going to say never going back, because I think, politics is so uncertain. But in the end, the issue is not me personally.
That's interesting. So
the issue is not me.
There might be circumstances in which you would contemplate going back into politics.
The issue is, can Labour have...
I think that's what you did say that, didn't you?
Credible, radical, patriotic alternative to the Conservatives. That's what we need. We're not getting enough of that yet, despite the best efforts of Becky in that interview there. I'm not going to say never, but at the moment, that's not my plan. And there's a Labour leader and a Labour Party in Parliament and in the country. You've got to get on and deliver it. The country needs a strong opposition. We've not got it at the moment, and things need to get better.
Do you think Ed should go back into politics?
I think he should. But I have to say, having fought a by-election, I wouldn't advise anyone to choose. I wouldn't anyone to...
I don't want your parliamentary party. I'm not doing that, just to be clear.
We can manage as we are, thank you. But I wouldn't advise anyone to choose a by-election. It's pretty tough.
That's interesting. Anyway, look, my thanks to Becky Long. Let's go and choose some of that over with my guests, Ed Balls and Douglas Carswell. Douglas, do you think the Chancellor is right to essentially not spend any additional revenues that look as though they are now coming in?
Absolutely. We need to return to fiscal sanity. No disrespect to Ed, but when his lot left, for every £5 the government was spending, we were borrowing £1. We need to return to fiscal sanity. It's difficult, but the government, to be fair to them, are making progress, and I want to hear on Wednesday that they're taking yet further steps towards fiscal sanity. We as a country are not going to be viable unless we sort this out.
If the Office of Budget Responsibility shows that borrowing is coming down a bit faster than we thought in the autumn, do you think the government should be using that money to invest in health, social care, the police and so on?
Well, the interesting thing is that Philip Hammond can, because he set out last year an approach to the deficit, a fiscal plan, which was the same, in fact, even slightly, arguably weaker than the ones that we set out at the 2015 election. He's not trying to get back into deficit until to balance until the next Parliament. He's trying to be a normal Conservative Chancellor who says, I'm very tough, but I might just kind of solve a few problems next week without doing anything more than that. Personally, I actually think that looks safe is actually more risky. He's got a building problem with the NHS. We've now had 6 or 7 years where the squeeze has been much tighter than anything that Margaret Thatcher ever did to the NHS. If I was Philip, I think I would set out not a short-term bung for social care or wait for a couple of years. I would be thinking, let's get the NHS and social care onto a more sensible medium-term path, and I would do it now. He's got the room for manoeuvre within his fiscal rules. He can do it. Of course he wants to save some money back in case Brexit goes wrong, but at the moment the NHS for the Conservatives is a ticking time bomb, and this could go bust well before the next election. I think he's been quite reckless on the NHS. I think the cautious thing to do would be to do something more substantial next week.
Douglas, right.
But the choice on Wednesday is fundamentally between John McDonnell and Comrade Corbyn, who want to spend money that we don't have, or making sensible investment in social care, in the NHS, but ultimately fixing that gaping hole in the national
But within his
debt.
fiscal rules, he can do more next week than he's currently planning because he set out sensible rules last year.
But your party's advocating that we throw all that caution to the wind and we go on another Osbrown spending
I'm not talking
splurge.
about party politics. I'm just telling you what I think a sensible, cautious Chancellor would do next week. I think it's quite reckless to build up a war chest. He's got room for manoeuvre. The NHS at the moment is crumbling. He needs not to have a short-term bung. That's old politics. He needs a sensible medium-term plan for the NHS and social care. And if he waits 1 or 2 years, this could blow up before the next election.
I'll be back to both of you in just a minute.
You should be more cautious about it.
Allegra just wants to say a few things.
Well, they may be disagreeing, but what actually unites our friends is that they have both gone it alone and put their popularity directly to the test. Let's have a look at how. So, Douglas Carswell, he broke away from the Conservatives. He got 21,000 votes in the by-election. OK, yes, in the general election a year later, he dipped a bit, but still, that's pretty good number. For those of you not on Twitter, this is the emoji he likes to use a lot, and you might understand why when you look at those numbers. Meanwhile, as Robert touched on earlier, Ed Balls created his own headlines last year, watched by 10 million people on Strictly, the sort of viewing figures Robert and I are really comfortable with. Now, compare them to their parties and the men leading them. In recent weeks, you've got here, this is Paul Nuttall, leader of the UKIP, sitting in that seat where the Chancellor is now with his head in his hands. He only got 24% of the vote in the Stoke by-election. And then this is what was said about Labour when it lost Copeland, the first party in opposition to lose a by-election to a governing party since 1982. So, Croissant Corner today, the home of direct democracy. Now, this morning, we have had quite some reaction on Twitter from UKIP funder Aaron Banks. Douglas Carswell, he has actually levelled quite an accusation at you. I'm going to show you the Twitter exchange, which is quite complicated. This is former UKIP donor Aaron Banks. His accusation is that you gave UKIP data to the Conservatives fighting Nigel Farage in Thanet South at the last election. Aaron Banks is here reiterating that he will stand against you in Clacton. Could he beat you, Douglas?
Yeah, well,
So let's just get that charge put to you. Did you give sensitive data to the Tories?
Utter nonsense. I'm blamed for not getting Nigel a knighthood. I'm now being blamed for our failure in Thanet South. How long before they rewrite history and blame me for Stoke? Look, you know...
I think the only UKIP politician who's ever won an election to Parliament, and they obviously resent him very much.
You know, since the referendum, we won for heaven's sake. Since the referendum, I've been in this zen-like state of bliss. I've been walking on sunshine. I've felt like an emoji smiling every day. What is it about these people that makes them so cross?
Just to be clear, because the other charge they throw at you is that you're thinking of defecting back to the Tories. Is there any truth to that?
Of course he should go back to the Conservatives.
I'm not rejoining the Conservatives.
Of course he should.
I'm not really a Conservative. I like change. I want change. The Conservative Party is doing the right thing now, but they're only doing it because they're forced to. That's the trouble with the Conservative Party.
So you're very comfortable in UKIP, and you will fight the next election as a UKIP candidate.
Absolutely. I feel very... And, you know, there's this talk about people standing against me. I've stood in Clacton 4 times. I've won 4 times. And, you know, every time I've stood, there have been the most eccentric and wonderful names on the ballot paper. Once, there was even a candidate who changed his name by deed poll to Mr. Ha Ha Woof Woof. He got a couple hundred votes. I'm very relaxed about it.
But having your own party
why-
and your own donors saying they're going to stand against you. Look, the reason why Douglas should go back was because...
So you think he should get back to the Tories?
Look, Douglas advocated a hard Brexit. He now has a Prime Minister who, rightly or wrongly, I think wrongly, is ploughing ahead with a hard Brexit. From the inside of the Conservative Party, he could hold them to account and influence their direction much more effectively than from Ukip, where he has to spend all of his time being attacked by Aaron Banks while being defended by Paul Nuttall, and I'm not sure which is worse.
To be fair...
Which is worse, Douglas?
The past 8 months, I have felt so happy and so delighted. I just ask again, what is it that makes these people so cross? If primarily you're in politics to get us outside the EU, which is why I'm in politics, why the long, grumpy faces?
Just to go back to Labour
Yep.
for a moment, do you think, you know, talking about sort of leaderships, that there should be a challenge?
Look, I've been on your programme loads of times having this discussion. There was a leadership challenge last summer, which was the wrong thing to do. It didn't work.
So the timing was wrong.
Is currently
so is the timing
leader.
right now?
Look, in the end, the question for Jeremy Corbyn is, can he and John McDonnell be a credible, radical, patriotic alternative to the Conservatives, which has got to be decided not by party members, but by voters in the ballot box. And at the moment, every opinion poll says no, and they've got a period of time to show that they can do it.
How long is the period of time that they've got?
Well, if I was Theresa May, I'd be calling an early general election to destroy Labour, because currently Labour's rather weak. She's not doing so, which on the one hand means Labour's got to go through this process for a longer time.
She may.
Although, as I said, she's taking some risks with her Chancellor. I think Philip Hammond will turn out to be seen not as a cautious Chancellor, but a bit more of a gambling Chancellor.
Now, don't go...